Wij gaan de vrouw maar eens opzoeken van deze meneer McDonough. Die kan ons misschien wat vertellen over zijn leven. Goed plaatje ook dit.
Ja. Het lijkt wel een vinger.
Ja, een vinger.
What? Who are you?
I'm Miles Fordham,
Hij
private
heeft hier ook een
investigator.
schilderij van Lodewijk XIV.
Of course. Forgive me. I was
Dit
just,
is volgens
well,
mij
never
Beethoven.
mind. Please make yourself comfortable, Mr. Fordham.
Thank you, Mrs. McDonough.
Het zijn beroemde schilderijen.
Just a painting of some boring old aristocrat. Lord Alfred Edward Shufflebottom the Wise comes to mind when looking at this one. This one looks like a Lady Camilla Prudence Wigglewaddle the Grey.
Oké.
I think I'll call this one Lord Edmund Henry Lickspittle the Elder. They look expensive, but I bet they're totally
Knickknacks.
worthless. I feel sorry for the sucker who has to clean them. Surely this one was called Lady Felicity Euphemia Beaversnatch the Simple.
Beaversnatch.
Oké.
They
Wat
look
een man,
expensive, but
jongen.
I bet they're total.
Nou, we kunnen niks meer aanklikken verder.
Goeie informatie.
I appreciate you seeing me, Mrs. McDonough. I know you must be going through a difficult time right now.
What exactly is it you want from me, Mr. Fordham? I already spoke to the police about my husband's murder.
I just have a few questions of my own.
Oh, very well.
Waarom is hij saai?
Huh?
How are you feeling, Mrs. McDonough?
My husband of 42 years was shot in his office. How do you think I feel?
Tactful as always, Fordham. How do you do it?
My apologies. Perhaps that wasn't the most appropriate question. Is there anything I can do to help?
You can start.
Oh, klikt er per ongeluk verder.
What can you tell me about your husband?
I'll tell you the same thing I told the police, Mr. Fordham. Percival was one of the hardest working members of Parliament. He took his job extremely seriously. The recent election caused him a terrible amount of consternation, as I'm sure it did most people. He took Atwood's loss rather hard.
Did you see much of him?
I beg your pardon?
Surely someone with such an important position in government could find themselves consumed by their work. Did he spend much time at home?
He made it a point to come home and have dinner with me every night, even
Oh,
if he
kijk.
had to return to
Wat
the
een goeie
office
man.
afterwards.
And did that happen often?
At least 3 or 4 times in a week, yes. He'd stay in his office working late into the night. As I said, he was very dedicated to his role.
Sounds to me like she's quite dedicated to hers, too.
Did your husband have any enemies?
He was a politician, Mr. Fordham. Half the city hated him.
Did he ever receive any kind of threats against his life?
None that I was ever made aware of. I have no idea who could have killed him, let alone who could have gotten into his office to do it. He hadn't told me about any meetings or appointments this week.
Oh, maar die hebben wij
Was
gezien
it
in
his
de
custom to
agenda.
Ja.
inform you of his work affairs?
Precies.
Oh, well, I've always taken an interest in my husband's work. He'd often mention initiatives.
Kunnen we even vragen naar die dame?
People he was meeting,
Ja.
that sort of thing. Nothing sensitive or confidential, you understand. Just conversation about his day.
Can you think of any reason why your husband would have been murdered?
Not really. He was a vocal opponent of the construction of the Gascogne-Chumley Bridge, but I hardly think that would have been sufficient reason to drive someone to murder.
Why is that?
Well, it's just a bridge, isn't it? There are plenty of other ways to get to Chumley.
I meant, why was he opposed to it?
Oh, because the amount of money required to build it is exorbitant. Public funds should be used on roads and buildings that are falling apart. What's the point of having something shiny and new if everything around it is in disrepair?
Goeie vraag.
Are you familiar with the art of cryptography, Mrs. McDonough?
Hadden we die boeken gevonden, hè? Cryptography.
It's just, I noticed several books on the subject in your husband's office.
Oh, well, yes. Percival was interested in cryptography and secret messages and the like.
Misschien zit er een
He would
secret
sometimes
message in
leave
dat
Precies.
lege
when
blaadje.
we first began courting many years ago.
What kind of notes?
Oh, now, Mr. Fordham, those were private. But Percival got a thrill out of knowing I was the only one who could read them. Sometimes he would write them using a special ink that would only
Ah,
appear when
nou,
the paper
er
was
is hier een
heated.
open haard.
Kijk.
I can't remember the last time he did that, though.
Do you know anyone named Shackley?
No, I've never heard that name before. Why?
I saw your husband had a meeting scheduled with him shortly before his murder.
That can't be right. He didn't tell me about that. He always told me about his meetings.
It was written on his office calendar, clear as day.
As I said, I don't know who that person is. Why wouldn't Percival have told me about their meeting?
Why indeed?
Ja.
Are you familiar with someone named Ruby?
I can't say I am. Who is it?
Just a name that's come up in my investigation.
Sounds like the name of a trollop. Or perhaps a dog.
Oh.
Have you heard of the Justice Killer?
That was the name the police mentioned when they told me about Percival's
Ja.
meeting. It's
Onze
absolutely
verdachte.
terrifying to think that one sick person could be capable of such evil. Why is he called the Justice Killer? What justice was done by murdering my husband?
Goeie vraag.
I'm afraid I can't answer that right now, Mrs. McDonough, but I intend to find out. Those are all the questions I have for now, Mrs. McDonough.
All right, Mr.
Nou,
Ford.
zullen we dat briefje eens even in de open haard houden?
Lijkt me goed.
Om het te verwarmen. Heat a blank paper.
If this actually works, I'll eat my hat.
Ja, dat moet hij doen.
Hey.
Lekker hoor.
Oké.
Oeh.
Nou, dan moeten we eens even vragen aan Barry.
I'll be damned.
Een goede vraag.
Ja?
Can we talk some more, Mrs. McDonough?
Al een belangrijk
I
gesprek
suppose
dit.
so, yes.
Kijk.
Do you know anything about this letter?
I'm afraid I don't have my spectacles. What is it?
The coroner found it in your husband's pocket. He gave it to me because he thought it was blank. But after you told me about your husband's propensity for writing secret messages, I decided to try exposing the paper to heat. Allow me to read it to you. Dearest Mary, words cannot express the regret and sorrow I feel for how I acted last night. I swore to myself I would never harm you again after the last time, but I have failed us both. It is my deepest hope that you can forgive me and trust that I will never allow this monster out again.
I see. May I have that letter, Mr. Fordham?
I'm afraid I have to keep it for now. It's evidence.
I suppose that does make sense.
Oké.
Mrs. McDonough, did Percival mistreat or abuse you?
He wasn't a bad man, Mr. Fordham. I wouldn't have married him if he was. It's just the stress of his responsibilities would sometimes oppress
Agressieve
him.
man.
I would try and offer comfort, soothe his nerves. But there were a few instances where he lost control of his passions.
Did he ever hit you?
He did.
How many times did this
Kijk.
happen?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe 2 or 3. You don't exactly count these things.
What a bastard. Maybe it serves him right for getting shot.
Thank you for your candor, Mrs. McDonough.
Can we please talk about something else?
Those are all the questions I have for now, Mrs. McDonough.
Ja.
All right, Mr. Fordham.
Nou, dan hebben we met haar gesproken. Die Edwards die zei nog iets over snelling. Dat we met hem moesten praten. Over psychologische profielen. Dus misschien moeten we daar dan in de volgende video maar naartoe. Naar het politiebureau.
Ja.
Dat zien we dan wel weer. Graag tot de volgende.
Groetjes.
Doei.